we've been doing this work for a long time. You know, you mentioned 15 years. Mr. Belafonte first started the Gathering for Justice, brought together the elders of the civil rights movement after he had witnessed a 5-year-old girl by the name of Jaisha Scott being handcuffed. And her charge was that she was unruly in the classroom. And so we see the fact that police officers get called in to do what counselors actually should be doing, but then to also see the last shooting that happened in Wisconsin, where the young man, you know, was shot in the back. It's overwhelming. One, because we are under COVID, we are under this state of, you know, having to stay home, and but there's still killings happening, right? So there's a lot of trauma that people are experiencing, and then you want to get up and you want to fly somewhere and you want to organize. I think that's my nature, is just to go to wherever injustice is and organize something. And so I feel overwhelmed because I'm at this moment not able to travel, but I do have a dynamic team that I could deploy, you know, that is out. You know, there are folks in Kentucky that are part of Justice League supporting what's happening there with Until Freedom, and our sisters Linda and Tamika Mallory, and our brothers Angelo and Myson. But for me, as somebody who is a doer, who's been doing this work for 25 years and feel a connection to being, you know, on the front lines, it's challenging. But it's an opportunity as well to pass the baton and to give others the opportunity to lead and to train up young people to, you know, carry on in the spirit of our elders, the many people that you are familiar with and that I'm familiar with, like the Harry Belafontes and the Representative John Lewis's and the Bernard Lafayette's, Diane Nash's, and, you know, Alla Baker's. So I find this, you know, my husband and I always talk about opportunity and chaos, right? So what is this opportunity in all this chaos that's happening? But I will say my heart is always heavy. We organize in crisis every single day, and we get to meet the families that are directly impacted by state or police violence. And so, you know, you have to kind of take a deep breath and hold whatever your emotions are, especially as a pregnant woman. I find myself in tears a little bit more than I've ever have in my whole life, which is good because I always was very stoic in my work, you know, going into prisons, not personalizing, making it about myself, or working with families. You have to have a level of just strength in order to be there for other folks. But, you know, I shed a tear now. I'll be moderating panels and hearing from family members, and you know, it's hard. It's hard because I think, like you said, everything's happening all at once and it's so visible. And then it continues to happen, right? So George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Sean Monterrosa, Eric Salgado, Andres Gallardo, all the 3 young men that were killed at the hands of police, you know, different types of systems of police, whether it was CHP or police officers or even sheriffs. It's hard, and you want to be there for the families and work with them. And then I have a 2-year-old, or almost 2-year-old, who's also pulling on my shoulder, you know, needing me to be a mommy. So it's been quite interesting, but I'm happy to be celebrating our 15th anniversary. It's been a long 15 years, and Mr. Belafonte talks about the long distance runner. And so we're here for the long distance. But I also know that there's a time in which, you know, I gotta, you know, do my run and then allow somebody else to take the next couple of years too. So we're using this as an opportunity to train up.
Well, you mentioned Harry Belafonte and what happened with the little girl that was handcuffed. How did you get involved with Mr. Belafonte and the Gathering?
15 years ago, I used to be a young person in the space. I'm now an in-betweener. But I was a mentee of Nane Alejandres. I was working inside prisons and offering services to the men, the cultural committees inside DVI, or traveling around the world with Mr. Nane. And when Mr. Belafonte brought together the elders, what he realized was that a lot of the elders, you know, had their own positions. They had their own organizations, and what he had asked of the elders was to bring their mentees so that we could carry on the work. And so I was brought to the second convening, which was in Epps, Alabama. Mr. Belafonte chose a cooperative, a big old farm where we didn't have reception, where you couldn't drive, we about like 25 years old, we couldn't drive to the liquor store, and so we had to be in space with one another, with our elders. We had to have conversations, and we learned so much at that time about how our struggle, particularly Chicano, Latinos, Latinx people struggle, was really interconnected with the Black struggle of this country. And so build some really strong friendships and relationships that have carried on. People like DeWanna Thompson, people like CJ, Carrie Jenkins out of Atlanta. And so I was brought in as a youth organizer. I was part of the executive committee to help build what is now called the Gathering for Justice. Initially, we would consistently ask Mr. Belafonte, what is the agenda? He would convene us together. We were meeting, the African-American Black community with the Chicano Latino community, with the indigenous, the Onondaga Nation, with the poor white folks. And we were like, what is the agenda? And he would say to us, the agenda is to find the agenda. And so, after 15 years, I think we have found our agenda. Our agenda is to eliminate the racial inequalities that are perpetuated in the criminal justice system. Our agenda is to fight against state and police violence. Our agenda is to stop child incarceration. But it took, quite some time as we were building relationships. And what we learned is that we actually had more in common than we did differences. And in 2007, after we had traveled across the country meeting different people, what we were able to do is convene under the Gathering for Justice. Mr. Belafonte talked about every organization keeping their autonomy but connected to a larger mission and vision. We convened in Oakland in 2007 with Mayor Dellums, who welcomed us, in a lot of Bay Area organizations, and we had a national convention where we adopted the ideology of Dr. King, which was Kingian nonviolence. And so we organized in the spirit with the foundation of the past, but really honing in on the energy of the young people. And so been really excited to be part of this journey. I initially, like I said, I was young. I was brought in as an executive committee member, then hired to be the national organizing director. Now I'm the CEO and president. And so hopefully in a couple of years, one of our young people who has come in through our programs will take, will take the reins and lead this organization as well.
Well, let's talk about some of the current organizing. And you mentioned 3 names. These incidents of police violence happen every day. And many of them aren't reported on. And in many of the cases, they're on videos. So when we see the ones like the most recent one, obviously, of Jacob Blake, which is appalling as any others, we have a video. It's also interesting, I'm sure you'll agree. Obviously, the intent was to kill, but they didn't.
Right.
Which is going to obviously result in some ramifications we've not seen recently. An actual survivor of this type of attack who will be able to articulate and share his own witness and testimony about what was going on. Normally, we don't have that. The person is dead. So this is a whole nother thing. But you mentioned some others, and what I really like to do, Carmen, is kind of walk through some of these other cases and the ones you've been looking at in California, and obviously these are some of the ones that haven't gotten as much national attention, but they need to. So if we could go through a little of those, if you don't, a few of those, if you don't mind.
Of course. So, in the month of, I would say from May to June, it seemed like it was open season on Latinos here in the state of California. Right. We had Eric Salgado, who was driving with his pregnant girlfriend, who was shot down by the CHP. Young Latino man, His girlfriend ended up miscarrying. I mean, they're still seeking not only justice for Eric Salgado, but they're also seeking justice for his girlfriend. I believe her name is Brianna as well. Then on June 2nd, June 1st, a young man by the name of Sean Monterrosa was out actually protesting on behalf of Black Lives Matter. The last text that he sent his sisters, Michelle and Ashley, were to sign the petition for George Floyd. And he was gunned down by Vallejo Police Department in front of a Walgreens. And they shot through an actual, the window, the front window of a undercover police car. And the police, I believe the police commissioner has actually destroyed that evidence. There's a lot of things that are happening. They're putting a gag order on the family not to speak. But there's a lot of injustice that's happening. And immediately after that, Andres Gallardo, who was killed in Southern California, he was a security guard. He was killed by the sheriffs. And in that case, the sheriffs have actually, I believe, put a moratorium. They have blocked the ability for the family to see the coroner's report, right? So there's so much that happens every day. And Jacob Blake, you talk about a survivor. There are two other survivors that Justice League works with. We have Jacob Servin, who was a survivor of a beating out of Stockton Police Department. He's a young man that has been wanting the release of the names of the officers who have actually beat him. He also wants them prosecuted for attempted murder. They left him to die, essentially. And then you have Akbar Rogers out of Long Island, who, one of our Justice League members, Nia, works closely with. He himself was charged for his own assault by police. Fortunately, the community came around and rallied around him, and they were able to drop those charges. But he's another young man that has lived to tell his story, right? And so what we're seeing every single day is this trauma. And you're right, a lot of these cases are not getting national attention. I think what was very difficult about Jacob Blake is the fact that he had just broken up a fight, right? And he had his children in the car, and he was walking away. He was de-escalating. He was trying to get out of the situation, and a police officer with their ego grabbed him and started shooting him point blank. And so what oftentimes I think what people should understand is the fact that police officers are trained to kill. They are trained in their public safety course to kill other people because they want to go home to their families. They want to be able to write the police report. And so we need all hands on deck. I know that we have seen, because of the work that has happened with Black Lives Matter and the investment in the last 6 years of Black Lives Matter, we have now seen the ability for us to organize rapidly. And we also at the Gathering for Justice, we've been doing this work before the hashtag, but a hashtag allows you to connect to other people, right? A hashtag also allows you to connect to other organizers and to a cause, and really identify the fact that at this moment we need to say Black Lives Matter, because what we are seeing, especially with state violence, when it comes to police violence, is we're seeing that Black lives actually don't matter. It's taken years for one officer to actually be fired in the NYPD, who was responsible for the death of Eric Garner. You and I have marched for I don't know how many years. We've been in support of Gwen Carr and Eric Garner's family, and still we haven't seen justice for the family because not all of the officers that were there have been held responsible. Not only did he need to be fired, he also needs to be held accountable, right? But that was, again, the community organizing, the family organizing. And so that's what it really looks like when you have people who are able to support these families that are not necessarily people who wanted to be part of this club. I just hosted and moderated for families of police violence through the Human Rights Network and Uncle Ron, the Jordan Davis Foundation. And it was so beautiful because we were talking about joy. For the first time, you were able to hear the stories of loved ones who have been killed at the hands of police by their family members. And there was an expression of joy, sharing the beautiful stories of who they were, not who the media painted them to be. So these stories need to be told. Sean Monterrosa, there's his information, there's petitions that need to be signed. There's also Andres Guayardo and Eric Salgado. And we don't often hear about Latinos because Latinos are often misidentified. The Vallejo Police Department misidentified Sean Monterrosa and said he was African American. And so there's this misidentification when it comes to Latinos. There's also a fear, right, of families speaking out because of potential undocumented status or just not knowing the system, having a language barrier. But, you know, for us, we're going to continue to fight, whether it's for Sean Monterrosa or if it's continuing on the path to fight for Eric Garner, whose family still needs justice, right? We will always be there showing up, and especially with Jacob Blake and all the other individuals that were killed in Wisconsin. You know, there's an officer in Wauwatosa who has 3 bodies on him. And so we just need to make sure that we continue to shed light on these issues. And part of the work that we do at the gathering is doing that.